You are listening to another No Fair Remembering Stuff, the Tuesday edition of the Professional Left Podcast, and available wherever you get your podcasts, and at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a Patreon button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at the Professional Left Podcast, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
And it's not safe for work.
And the working title for today's episode is Deplorables and the Fever. We're going to look at one notable moment from the 2016 presidential campaign that the meatheads still bitterly cling to like they cling to their guns and their Bible. You see what I did there, Blue Gal?
I see what you did there, Driftglass.
Yeah.
We're going to do one more important thing, the thing that's the ongoing mission of the Professional Left, which is also the thing that still makes liberals media pariahs, I think.
Yeah.
We're going to contextualize Hillary Clinton's deplorables moment.
Uh-huh.
We're going to talk about the larger trajectory of events during which that moment comes and why it completely freaked out the pundits and those very serious centrists and elite conservative influencers that you see on television.
Mm-hmm.
This is before Biden and before Trump and even before Obama. Before podcasting, when we started podcasting in 2010, Driftglass, before that, we were bloggers.
Yep.
And it's funny because we succeeded in podcasting in terms of consistency and getting an episode out and having a consistent message and not running out of content.
2 episodes out.
And
2 episodes.
Not getting burnt out by it and so forth. And people said, how do you succeed at this? And we said, well, first you blog for 6 years.
Right. Step 1.
Then step 1, blog for 6 years and then start podcasting and you'll have no problems.
Well, and our secret sauce, our true secret sauce is find a wonderful, loving person with whom you share a lot of opinions, but differ on some stuff. So you can have awesome conversations and then fall in love and then get married and then start podcasting. That's our secret.
We didn't do it in that order, though. We podcasted before we were married. So
we podcast, and which is not scriptural. I mean, you're supposed to podcast after marriage.
Podcasting,
It's very clear what it says in the book. Podcast after marriage.
Anyway, where was I now?
Well, the thing we do. And the thing that pisses off
yes, we
media,
were bloggers. That's right. We were bloggers before all of this.
Yeah.
And even all the way back then, we believed, and we still believe, it's important to explain the world we're living in.
Right.
And even at times when we find it incomprehensible, talking about it helps it make sense.
Yeah.
We were the ones who looked at the election of George W. Bush and then his re-election despite being obviously and manifestly unfit for the job. We looked at the rubble and ruin he left in his wake in 2008, and we kept trying to make sense of all of this.
Right. How'd this happen?
How could this be us? How could this be America?
Right.
How could America re-elect George W. Bush?
Yeah.
And call him a good Christian man?
Yeah. Right up until the moment it all went boom. And then they all pretended they never heard of him.
They didn't know who he was, and they were Tea Party. Right.
What?
So we bloggers always talk about how we're documenting the atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us widen our lenses and try to explain what's happening on the right. Driftglass is very good at that. And I have to say, when Driftglass wrote this, and he really wrote it, the script for this episode, he got depressed.
I did.
Because, part of what you're talking about is not seeing any progress in this area of the media continually making excuses for the right.
Oh, I've seen it just gotten so much. In fact, right now.
And now it's just gotten worse, right?
Yeah. You can't see it because we don't do this. Well, we do this on camera with each other, but we don't do it on video yet. I'm curled up under a table naked in a fetal position.
No, you're not.
With a bottle of scotch, just weeping between
hugging his scotch bottle. No, but why is it only going to get worse on the right? And we're going to talk about that today, and
Mhm.
how the political media is just in complete denial that
Yeah.
there's a problem.
And why is that?
And there is a
Why?
problem with 37% of this country. There's a
A
real
deep,
problem there.
intractable problem, a
Yeah.
deep and intractable problem. So, in that spirit, I'm going to indulge myself. This is incredibly self-indulgent of me. I've done it before. If you've heard this or read this post before, you can skip over the next couple of minutes. But I'm rereading a couple of paragraphs that are from 16 years ago. I wrote this 16 years ago, October of 2008. This is before Barack Obama was ever elected. And it's entitled Understanding the Right, #1. I wrote a whole bunch of things about
I'm
how
sorry,
to...
it's 14 years ago.
14 years ago.
14 years
Nope.
ago.
Nope.
Because it would be 20, if it was 16, it would be 16, 8 times 3 is 24. No, you're right, it's 16 years ago.
16 years ago.
I need to mark this now.
No, that's okay.
549.
Leave it like that.
Okay.
Because it seems
Warts
like...
and all. This is a warts and all podcast.
Well, because it seems like yesterday. I mean,
It
really,
does. It does.
The depressing part, the reason I'm under a table hugging a
He's
bubble
not.
scotch, naked and crying, is that going back and reading stuff like this, which was me explaining to people before Barack Obama was even elected, while George Bush was still president, why the fuck are these people so messed up? Why can't they see what's right in front of them? And why the fuck won't the media talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it was really a mission that we've been on since the beginning. So now this was a post in which I very explicitly analogized the GOP, the base of the Republican Party, to drug addicts. They loved Reagan because Reagan was their first pure, uncut high. He was their wowgasm. He was the thing that went right past the blood-brain barrier into their souls. And they hated Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton was methadone maintenance. He was, baby shit. It was all policy wonk, and it wasn't cut with that industrial waste grade, bigoted, psychotic bloodlust that gives conservatism its wild freebasing edge. So this is from this thing from 16 years ago. Quote, and W was meth with a ketamine chaser delivered hammer and anvil directly to the lizard brain. W was 40 million pig people tired of the hard, fussy job of being a tolerant, powerful democracy, finally, once and for all, blowing America's family inheritance on an 8-year blood-drunk bender.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the last lie a conservative tells himself? The last lie that the junkies and their suppliers both fight like hell to keep alive and twitching. That whether or not their ideology is depraved or diluted, it doesn't matter because, say it with me now, both sides are always equally wrong about everything all the time.
Yeah.
Remember, 16 years ago, this was self-evident that the media was doing this and it was enabling the worst people in the country. It's the lie. It doesn't matter who or what or when, doesn't matter how, doesn't matter who was driving the bus towards the cliff and who was waving the red flags and throwing our bodies in front of it, trying to make it stop. Doesn't matter who was trying to douse the conflagration with hoses shredded by 20 years of Reaganism and who was lobbing milk cartons full of jellied gasoline onto the bonfire. It is the lie that the hagged-out Cokie Roberts pushes week after week after week on This Week with Cokie Roberts, This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's the lie that David fucking Brooks pushes in the pages of the New York Times every goddamn week. It is the lie that made David Broder the dean of the villagers, the lie on which the quarterly profits of the entire Murdoch empire media rests, unquote. That was 16 years ago.
This wasn't some wild stretch of the imagination. This was more or less the considered opinion of most liberal writers at the time. It is not unique to Driftglass.
No, we were all screaming this at the top of our lungs. Don't you know where this is going to lead? We're heading for disaster. Why can't you see this? And, all of our Never Trump friends were then diligent, hardworking Republicans who were telling us to shut up, that we were crazy.
Well, and we were traitors.
We were traitors.
Yeah.
America-hating, terrorist-loving, surrender monkey traitors. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
The Republican Party base was a volatile mob of bigots and fools, and the GOP leadership kept stoking the rage and paranoia of the base to hold on to power, especially during the Iraq War. And the mainstream media and elite conservatives just flat out lied about it. Mm-hmm. And it was a scary thought. It was also incredibly transgressive to come out and say that most of our problems are caused by a Republican Party that is very clearly losing its mind, and that rather than tell the truth about our situation, Venerable institutions like the New York Times and Meet the Press are selling their readers and viewers the incredibly toxic both sides do it lie.
Yeah. So in that context, this is how the deplorable freakout started. This is from a retrospective article in the Washington Post from August 31st, 2021. Quote, Hillary Clinton's deplorable speeches shocked voters 5 years ago, but some feel it was prescient. Hillary Clinton said those three words in the final months of her 2016 presidential campaign, making rhetorical and political history. There were two kinds of Donald Trump supporters, she explained. Voters who feel abandoned and desperate, who she placed in one metaphorical basket, and those she called racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, and Islamophobic in her basket of deplorables. On September 9th, 2016, Clinton was the opening act for Barbra Streisand at a glitzy fundraiser in New York City. A group of LGBTQ supporters were gathered at Cipriana restaurant, and the Democratic candidate had one job: to fire up her donors. Quote, I'm all that stands between you and the apocalypse, Clinton told the cheering crowd. She launched into all the things she found deplorable about Trump. He threatened marriage equality, cozied up to white supremacists, made racist and sexist remarks, all things she found so personally offensive. She warned there were 2 months left in the race and no one should assume he couldn't be elected anyway. Just be grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables, right? There was laughter and applause. The people in this basket, emboldened by Trump's tweets, were irredeemable, she said. But there was another basket. Trump supporters who just felt the government had let them down and wanted change. And Democrats, listen carefully, Democrats had to empathize to win these voters, unquote.
And Hillary's words spread like a prairie fire, mainly because it threw pundits and centrist and elite conservatives a life preserver. Yay! Instead of reporting on the dire threat the Republican Party had become, they could keep the both sides do it lie stoked for another few weeks. That Hillary had blown up by calling Trump voters baskets of deplorables.
Half of Trump voters are irredeemably racist or homophobic or xenophobic.
How dare she?
How dare she? We don't do that in this country.
Right. And this was Politico, Time Magazine. Remember Time Magazine? Bustle, PolitiFact, Vox. And after throwing a full-on hissy fit over her saying that, pundits and centrists and elite conservatives could picnic still further because Hillary Clinton sort of walked her statement back.
Yes, she did.
From CNN, Clinton expresses regret for saying half of Trump supporters are deplorables. Quote, Hillary Clinton expressed regret Saturday for comments in which she said half of Donald Trump's supporters are deplorables, meaning people who are racist, sexist, homophobic, or xenophobic. Last night, I was grossly generalistic, and that's never a good idea. I regret saying half. That was wrong, Clinton said in a statement in which she also vowed to call out bigotry in Trump's campaign.
Yeah.
And
then
I think we've all learned a lesson from the mistake that you make when you're running for president is that the media is not your friend and you have no room for declaring that you're wrong about anything.
Nope.
In fact, Trump taught us that. Double down.
No. Trump,
I said they're baskets of deplorables. They're the Klan. What do you want me to say?
Trump taught us that works for Republicans. Democrats are not allowed to speak harshly about anyone. We're not allowed to tell the truth about anyone. We have to be gentle and kind and open-handed. But Donald Trump could just shit all over everything and swear to wipe his ass with the Constitution. Like, well, that's just him. What you gonna do? Yeah. Now, the NPR Tone Police made a 5-course fucking meal out of it. This is from September 10th, 2016. Quote, Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables in full context of this ugly campaign. Memo to candidates, stop generalizing and psychoanalyzing your opponent's supporters. It never works out well for you. The latest to fall into that trap is Hillary Clinton. The Democratic nominee at a New York fundraiser Friday night with liberal donors and Barbra Streisand said half of Trump supporters fit into a basket of deplorables, while the other half are people who feel the government has let them down and need understanding and empathy. The comments have rocketed around the internet, infuriated conservatives, and threatened once again to throw salt in the wound of the American cultural divide. In a presidential election that has seen vitriol and insult fueled by Donald Trump that have become the norm, the remarks also remind of inflammatory remarks in recent presidential elections on, say it with me now, both sides. Both sides, unquote.
This was David Brooks on PBS the same week. Quote, "The irredeemable is what leapt out at me. And the person who was at the Emmanuel Baptist AME Church in Charleston, they believe the guy who shot and killed their close friends was redeemable, but she thinks millions of Americans are not." And that speaks, and I think it plays because there's a brittleness there. And I don't know if there is a brittleness within. I sort of doubt it. I think she's probably a very good person within, but there has been a brittleness to her public persona that has been ungenerous and ungracious. And it plays a little to that and why people just don't want to latch on. Unquote.
Yeah. Yeah.
The simmering sexism in that.
And just to remind you that during the primaries, David Brooks wrote an entire column that was Trump and Sanders, Trump and Sanders, Trump and Sanders, Trump and Sanders. Because Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders were exactly the same person, exactly the same untrustworthy, demagogic. Oh, Sanders lost. He pivoted immediately to a column, Trump and Hillary, Trump and Hillary, Trump and Hillary, Trump and Hillary, because he was fucking obsessed with the both sides, centrist, everyone's equally to blame. And of course, the PBS stuff was Brooks just recycling his own column in the New York Times from September 13th, 2016, entitled "The Avalanche of Distrust." I'm beginning to think this whole sordid campaign is being blown along by an acrid gust of distrust. The two main candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, are remarkably distrustful. They have set the modern standards for withholding information. His not releasing tax and health records, her not holding regular news conferences or quickly disclosing her pneumonia diagnosis. That was the end of the fucking world as far as David Brooks was concerned. Both have a problem with spontaneous, reciprocal communication with a hint of vulnerability. Trump's convention speech was the perfect embodiment of the politics of distrust. American families, he argued, are under threat from foreigners who are as violent and menacing as they are insidious. Clinton's basket of deplorables riff comes from the same spiritual place. We have in our country, she jibed, millions of bigots, racists, xenophobes, and haters. People who are so black-hearted, they are, as she put it, irredeemable, unquote.
But there was this counterpoint from Charles Blow in the New York Times, September 12th, 2016. Now, what kind of a person is Charles Blow?
Oh, I've seen him. I don't see color, so I'm not sure. But I think he's an African-American male liberal writer working for the New York Times.
Yeah. And listen to this and see if you think that it was written in September of 2016 or was written yesterday, because to me, it's astonishing that how fresh it sounds.
And that's the depressing part, because going back all these years and reading what people were making apologies and excuses for, and reading the people who were saying, stop doing that. Look at what's in front of you, is as fresh today as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 16 years ago, 30 years ago when we were talking about this stuff. It just has never gotten any better. Anyway.
All right, so here's Charles Blow about the basket of deplorables. What Clinton said was impolitic, but it was not incorrect. There are things a politician cannot say. Luckily, I'm not a politician. Donald Trump is a deplorable candidate, to put it charitably, and anyone who helps him advance his racial, religious, and ethnic bigotry is part of that bigotry. Period. Anyone who elevates a sexist is part of that sexism. The same goes for xenophobia. You can't conveniently separate yourself from the detestable part of him because you sense in him the promise of cultural or economic advantage. That hair cannot be split.
And that sounds like the Donald Trump 2024 campaign.
That sounds like he wrote it this morning.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, listen carefully to this sentence. Furthermore, one doesn't have to actively hate to contribute to a culture that allows hate to flourish.
David Brooks.
Well, and you and I have talked about today being bullied in high school.
Yeah.
And all the classmates who sat in the back and did nothing, and the teachers who did nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. They let it happen.
They let it happen.
And let it happen.
To kids, to us,
Yep.
to both of us.
To both of us. Yep.
And just let it happen because They're smart and they'll survive it and they'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, it's not my job to intervene. I don't want to take sides in this thing where this one kid's having his head pounded into the concrete. You know?
Right, right. It does. Oh, going on with Charles Blow. It doesn't matter how lovely your family, how honorable your work or service, how devout your faith. If you place ideological adherence or economic self-interest above the moral imperative to condemn and denounce a demagogue, then you are deplorable. And there is some evidence that Trump supporters don't simply have a passive, tacit acceptance of an undesirable platform, but instead have an active set of beliefs that support what is deplorable in Trump. I understand that people recoil at the notion that they are part of a pejorative basket. I understand the reflexive resistance to having your negative beliefs disrobed and your sense of self dressed down. I understand your outrage, but I'm unmoved by it. If the basket fits, unquote.
Unquote. Absolutely.
Yeah, I like his tax cuts.
Yeah.
I mean, this is still directed to Jamie Dimon, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, either way, whoever wins, I'll be fine. Everything will be fine. We'll get
Snoop Dogg.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, his tax cuts were great for me.
Yeah. Watching them accommodate themselves to an open, clear as a bell fascist threat because, well, he won't come for me. You know, my shit's covered. And everyone else, well, that's their problem, really. This next is from CNN from September 11th, 2016. The Bakari that Jake Tapper is referring to is CNN contributor Bakari Sellers. And the woman speaking after him is Diane Black, who was, at the time, the U.S. representative from Tennessee's 6th District. After this, she quickly became a staunch Trump ally and was uniformly awful on every issue from taxes to the environment.
Bakari, you're out there saying that this is not a gaffe in any way.
No, I don't think it's a gaffe in any way. I mean, I think that there is a clear difference between the 47% remark and what Hillary Clinton said. The 47% remark showed Mitt Romney's animus towards the poor. This remark shows Hillary Clinton's animus towards racists and bigots. I mean, it's very clear.
You think half of Donald Trump supporters are racist?
Well, I think that I can show you polls where over half of his supporters actually believe that Barack Obama is a Muslim informant. And over half of his supporters don't believe he was born in the United States. So I can show you polls of that nature. For many of us, this election is about beating back bigotry. But I do want to be clear, because I have two friends on the panel. Not all Donald Trump supporters are bigots. Not all, by any stretch. However, they do have to be okay with supporting a bigot. I think that's an important connotation.
Congressman, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. There are a lot of deplorable things being said by Donald Trump supporters on social media and at events. You've seen the shirts that say things that I can't even say. Trump that B word about Hillary Clinton. I mean, there are horrific scenes that we see at those events.
Let me just say this. I don't care what the title is or the title, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I don't want my presidential candidates putting people in baskets. And I will tell you, not 47% of the people in my district who support Donald Trump are racists or bigots. And I think that it is deplorable for someone running for president to start out by saying, by the way, if you don't agree with me, you're a bigot or you're a racist. And that's what she's saying. And I'm insulted by that. And I think the American people will be insulted by that.
We turn once again to the Washington Post retrospective article from August 31st, 2021. Quote, Trump, the same man who announced his candidacy by calling Mexican immigrants rapists, clutched his proverbial pearls, aghast that his opponent had uttered such a shocking slander. His campaign turned that insult into an asset. Supporters wore hats and shirts proudly declaring themselves deplorable, not knowing what deplorable meant. Yeah. Pundits seized on the phrase, debating who does and doesn't deserve to be called that. 5 years later, many believe deplorables, figuratively and literally, are here to stay. It's very hard to say you have a message of civility and then turn around and talk about how essentially a quarter of the country is, in your view, a basket of deplorables, said Jonathan Allen, author of Shattered, a study of Clinton's 2016 campaign. That is a screeching conflict of her overall message, which is we have a civilized country and we need to be stronger together, that this should be a kinder, gentler, unified country, unquote.
Yeah. You know, when we all came together to defeat the Nazis, nobody said, you're being so divisive. Why Well, why can't both sides work together?
Well, because the Nazis weren't white people in the United States
Right.
of America.
No,
Except there were some.
Yeah.
But that's a longer story. That's for
I'm
Rachel
sorry.
Maddow to tell.
I meant to say the Confederacy. But remember, this is the No Fair Remembering Stuff podcast. Remember, Democrats tried that, didn't we? We tried really hard to do all the things that he's telling us to do. Barack Obama's administration was an 8-year lab experiment in continuous and nearly superhuman efforts to reach out to Republicans, find common ground with Republicans, compromise with Republicans, and they fucking hated him for it. Back then, all of your favorite Never Trumpers were making their living relentlessly slagging Obama and counseling lockstep obstruction and sabotage. To this very day, you will hear Republicans like Chris Christie and Nikki Haley just this week blaming Obama for the divisions in our country. You know, the good Republicans, even the good Republicans lean on, well, this country wasn't divided before Barack Obama came along and made it so. And this is the point at which that Washington Post article takes a very big, on the other hand, turn. Quote, Trump repeatedly mocked Clinton voters, but his fans never worried it would hurt him. In fact, they loved him for it, as well as his attacks on the media, the candidates in his own party, John McCain's war record, and the judge in one of his lawsuits. The more offensive and insulting he could be, the happier he was with it, Allen said. When asked about deplorables, Nick Merrill, Clinton's spokesman, said she was never afraid to denounce racism. Just 2 weeks earlier, she gave a significant speech deconstructing the alt-right and the, quote, quest to preserve white maleness, unquote, in America. The deplorable comment may have been politically less than ideal, but has proven right again and again over the last 5 years. Now, many of her fans believe she was prescient about half of Trump's base. After 4 years of President Trump, John Allen said, I think that there are a lot of Democrats and some Republicans who would say that was an undercount, unquote.
The same Jonathan Allen who
said,
guided her.
This is a screeching contradiction to your message of unity. Oh, yeah, they're fucking Nazis. Well, okay, fine. But my book's sold, right? I sold my book, right?
Right.
I get to keep my job at Politico, or whatever the fuck he's doing now, right? Okay, so it doesn't matter what he said. Nothing matters with these people. Anyway, I apologize.
That's all right. And this, from the deplorable Frank Luntz, is the key to understanding the failure of the pundits, the very serious centrists and elite conservative influencers. Quote, Luntz knew it would be an opportunity for Trump to galvanize his base. Luntz said, I thought she had committed a potentially fatal error. Insult your opponent, attack your opponent, criticize your opponent, even condemn your opponent. But never, ever, ever condemn your opponent's supporters because you need their votes.
Right.
No.
Donald Trump and Republicans have relentlessly attacked Democrats, base voters, liberals like you and me.
Even
and there's
this
never been any
weekend,
consequence.
J.D. Vance called us weird.
Yeah.
And not real Americans.
Yeah. So, no, it only works when you're listening to Frank Luntz give advice to Democrats on how Democrats should run their campaign. And this was part of a long-standing generalized embargo on never, ever taking a hard critical look at the actual base of the GOP. And that was creating a dilemma for those pundits and the centrists and the elite conservative influencers. Because why was the base of the party of Reagan and Romney supporting Donald Trump? I can't. How did that happen? I cannot figure that out. Why was that? Why was it that the worse Trump got, the more they loved him? And so they concocted out of thin air, the fever theory.
And everybody adopted the fever theory.
Oh, it must be some sort of
Barack
fever.
Obama adopted the fever theory.
And again, we're on the outside of that huge media bubble screaming, it's not the fucking fever. It's who they are. The notion that millions and millions of ordinary, noble, patriotic Republican voters had been seized by some kind of inexplicable temporary brain disorder, like being drunk. Millions and millions of them simultaneously drunk. A state that was irrational and offensive and sometimes even violent, but like a fever, it was transient. Soon it would surely pass. And the irony was that an actual delusional fever really was running wild in the country, but it very much wasn't what the pundits and the centrists and the elite conservatives thought it was. And so instead, we got daily headlines like these from virtually every major political news outlet. From Politico, September 17th, 2015, new data show Trump fever breaking.
From the Washington Post, October 25th, 2017, quote, CNN's Jake Tapper asked Jeff Flake a very good question Tuesday.
Remember Jeff Flake?
Jeff Flake. After the senator from Arizona announced he was retiring because he couldn't win a primary in President Trump's Republican Party, Tapper asked, why not make the case for why Trumpism is bad and let GOP voters decide on Trumpism?
You know.
I think that this fever will break, Flake said. I don't know that it'll break by next year, unquote.
He said in 2017. Yeah. This is from the Chicago Sun-Times, August 15th, 2023. Quote, Trump fever needs to be broken, says rare Republican willing to take on former president. I want to see more people stand up to Donald Trump on that stage, ex-Illinois House Leader Jim Durkin said of the first GOP debate next week in Milwaukee, unquote. How did that work out for you there, Jim?
From WNYC Studios Radio, March 31st, 2023. This is less than a year ago.
Uh-huh.
John Meacham on how the Trump fever breaks.
Yeah. And this, for our friends overseas, is from Channel 4, British Public Broadcasting Service, November 9th, 2022. Has Trump fever finally broken?
From Roll Call Magazine, November 22nd, 2022. Let's talk Turkey. Trump fever could be breaking in time for a Thanksgiving feast.
This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, May 24th, 2023, just last year. Can Tim Scott, remember Tim Scott, break the Trump fever for the GOP?
He can catch the Trump fever right away when it's convenient.
He huffed it straight from that man's ass. Yep.
Yes, he did.
Mm-hmm.
From The Wrap, February 26, 2022, quote, Bill Maher warns Democrats not to humiliate Republican voters whose Trump fever is cooling down. Real-time host urges liberals to show graciousness. You know, he's such an expert in showing graciousness.
Being above it all.
Fight the temptation to ask, what the fuck were you thinking, unquote.
Yeah. Well, the Washington Post, a name from our past, August 19th, 2018, by Ron Fournier. You remember Ron Fournier, right? Mr. Both Sides Do It. Quote, November 6th could be Independence Day.
I'm an independent.
And this could be our day. While a viable third party is as elusive as a horned horse, here means a unicorn, there exists a rare but real creature in American politics that can systematically dismantle the status quo. The independent.
I'm an independent.
Untethered to reality. No, that's not what he said. Untethered to the two major parties, growing in sums and significance, independent candidates and office holders, you know, like no labels, are the reindeer of American politics. Yeah. The ones that
Ron Fournier believes that these independents are going to take over the country.
What else is he going to believe? That he's been wrong about everything his entire fucking life? Going back to Ron Fournier, the infinite wisdom of Ron Fournier, who, remember, was Matthew Dowd's running buddy the entire 2016 election, preaching this bullshit up and down the aisles.
Yeah,
if
the corrupt duopoly, right.
No, the corrupt duopoly. Well, we're about to hear about them. If these creatures can be corralled into controlling coalitions in legislators across the country, including the U.S. Senate, they can find a powerful leverage point to break the partisan fever, unquote.
Because it's not just the fact that they're Republicans.
No, it's partisanship.
It's got to be a fever that has infected them that can be healed somehow.
And somehow it's both sides. It's a partisan fever.
And it's also Hillary's fault. Yes,
right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Our favorite from CNN, September 15th, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
The headline was Donald Trump fever starting to break.
And why was that our favorite? Because this is also from CNN. 6 years later, November 3rd, 2021, Donald Trump fever may be breaking, Blue Gal. Maybe breaking.
Now.
Yeah. It's just, they're just dittoing, they're just reposting. This is just AI reposting the same garbage headlines. Trump fever is on the verge of breaking. Now, pushing the reassuring fairy tale that what was wrong with the GOP was some mysterious, exogenous condition that would burn hot and quickly for a while, but then would surely burn itself out, was one of the most aggressive and concerted and destructive propaganda campaigns we have ever seen in the American political media. And no one except us liberals recognized it as the toxic delusion that it was. We liberals understood that racism and raging paranoia was the baseline resting state of the Republican base, not something that one more Trump outrage was somehow going to give them cause to get over it.
Yeah. And, this is the most ironic thing of all.
Yeah.
It's not that the Republican base were afflicted with a brain contorting fever.
No.
The pundits have the fever. They're the ones that have the delusions. They're the ones clinging to a gigantic lie like grim death. They're the ones who attacked anyone who threatened to take away their fairy tale. And tragically for our democracy, they're also the ones who control the media and police the parameters of legitimate criticism and conversation.
It was all the same dream, a dream that you had inside a locked room. A dream about being a person. And like a lot of dreams, there's a monster at the end of it.
And to riff on that, it was all the same dream. A dream they had inside their ivory tower. A dream about being savvy experts. And like a lot of dreams, there's a monster at the end of it. And that monster was Donald Trump.
Now let's talk for a minute about the New York Times' most recent conservative affirmative action hire, David French.
Mm-hmm.
You remember David French. David French was one of the conservative evangelicals on staff at the National Review and was the guy that Bill Kristol tried to get to run as an independent in 2016 because the thought of voting for Hillary Clinton was too horrible to contemplate. But Bill Kristol wasn't going to vote for Donald Trump either.
No, because he's a principled person. He
Right.
has principles, Blue Gal.
Now, David French came with a deeply problematic past.
Yeah.
And a paper trail about that deeply problematic past.
Yeah.
But he hastily rethought what he had written before or pretended he'd never said it in order to land a gig. And he landed a gig at the New York Times by rethinking what he had written when working at the National Review.
Mm-hmm.
And so 1 year ago, in January of 2023, there he was up on the Times Opinions masthead. The Times explained that they'd brought him in as an expert on the law, faith, and politics, and they praised him for his factual and intellectual clarity and moral seriousness. You got that? They hired him for his factual clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Mysteriously, the words Republican and conservative are nowhere to be found in his official Times bio.
Yeah. Weird. That's weird.
Anyway, last week he wrote a long column entitled Never Trumpers Never Had a Chance, in which he breathlessly reported on things that you and I and every liberal blogger who has ever written has known about the Republican Party for decades. So we're not going to bore you with all of that.
No. We're going to cut to the chase. But towards the end, David French writes this, quote, "It's now clear to me that we never had a chance, and the reason is equally clear. We did not truly understand our own party," unquote. Just sit with that for a second.
So then did he say liberals were right all along?
Oh, God, no. Because then his tongue would burst into flames and he'd have to give up his job at the New York Times. He's not going to say that. But he did go on to compare Donald Trump to Bill Clinton. So fuck you for that, David French.
Fuck you, David French.
Because they can't help themselves. They have to take a swing at liberals because that's what they trained to do for 40 years. And then he wrote this, quote, "I wasn't just wrong. I was completely embarrassingly wrong. The winds were shifting. I could sense it, but I didn't fully understand it. Not until Trump made it all plain," unquote. You know, like on the road to Damascus. Suddenly, the scales fell from his eyes.
Well, he's almost there. I mean, admitting you're wrong is a first step.
Sure.
But not acknowledging that other people weren't as wrong as you.
Well, here's the thing that makes me laugh. Remember, this guy, David French, who now admits he never had any fucking idea what he was talking about, is the guy the Times hired because of his political expertise.
Yep.
And his factual and intellectual clarity and his moral seriousness. And I do listen to these podcasts. I just got done listening to Rick Wilson and Sippy Cup, SE Cup, bemoaning the fact that one guy ruined their party. That in the good old days, conservatives were X and Y and Z, and they all were listened they all listened to Bill Buckley, and they were all morally serious and intellectually rigorous. And then one guy came along, ruined the whole thing. And more, this is becoming a common, very stunted, very halting, very painful epiphany among recently former Republicans, that their party is really for real dead, and never-Trumpers will never, ever be welcomed back as the liberators once the fever breaks.
You think?
Yeah. And that was the plan after 2016. The plan was Hillary's going to win, so we can pile on her all we want. Trump will lose. We will come in with our autopsy and say, see, we told you so. And Bill Kristol and the rest of these douchebags, we welcome back as liberators. And that never happened. So they decided to crowd out liberals in the media, like you and me and everybody else we know, and colonize MSNBC, where they've been telling us how to run our own goddamn party for 7 years now. And all of this is because the base is permanently and malignantly insane. There's another word for that, deplorable, perhaps, if you will. So how does that happen? It happens because the pundits and the centrists and elite conservatives were all sharing the same fever dream. The dream that the Republican base was something which it very clearly was not. A dream that most of them still adamantly refuse to wake up from.
Mm-hmm. They're the ones with the fever. The pundit, the David Brookses are the ones with the fever.
And they won't give it up because they can't. They can't.
It pays the bills to have that fever, apparently.
It's also for the same reason that the Trumpists can't. Because if they admit they're wrong, they lose their job. There's no purpose. There's no point in them being. There's no point to have it in existence. They have to admit they've been wrong for 5 years or 3 years or 2, but for 20 years and 30 years, their whole career has been a fraud. And they psychologically, emotionally, financially, they can't admit that. They can't admit liberals are right. So they are clinging to their delusion and their lie the same way the Trumpists cling to their delusions and their lies. Except the ones in the middle, the pundits and elites, are the ones who float above it all. Who are the ones looking down and going, Well,
they're the ones that are supposed to have an objective view of the political scene.
Exactly.
And instead, they're kind of deplorable.
They are. One and all deplorable. By the way, if you wanted to read all about this instead of listening to this podcast, thank you for listening to this podcast all the way through, by the way. I took most of these show notes and I'm turning them into a post at my blog with links and videos and all those things. So you can find it at the Drift Class blog probably later tonight or tomorrow when I post it after this podcast. But listen to this podcast first, because this is us talking.
Well, clearly they are.
Yes.
Also, yes, we were on the Bill show. We recorded the episode last night, had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The Bill show is, Bill is an expat living in Australia, and we've been on his show a number of times before.
Yeah.
It's always a fun time.
It's always fun.
And so he's going to get that edited and in the can later this week. We can't wait. We'll let you know on the socials when that happens. And we also want everyone to remember what, Driftglass?
That we really need more Patreons. I know we say it every week, but it's still true. We really do need more Patreons to make this podcast fly. So if you can spare $5, please spare $5 and visit our Patreon at patreon.com/ProLeftPod. And really sincerely thank you for doing that.
Yeah. And you can donate a lump sum for the year all at once. Or you can do it $5 a month. However you want to do it is your choice. So we really appreciate your support.
And
thanks.
You know what? Here's the thing. We don't have $50 million in legal bills we have to pay for.
True.
We're very economical when it comes to...
On the upside.
Yeah.
But our healthcare bill is higher than our mortgage. So.
Yeah, there is that. Well, thanks and bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. The Professional Left podcast, No Fair Remembering Stuff Tuesday edition, is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25 DGBG Productions.